You may talk of your pleasure trips on the Great Lake, but a trip on these canal boats you bet takes the cake. These take as tough as a fighting dog's neck, and the flies they play tag with their cook on the deck. The potatoes she'll burn, let their coffee boil o'er, the fume nearly choke you, so breezy the floor. The cook room's a limit, you must eat or die, and when it's all over, you laugh till you cry. So haul in the tow line and take up the slack, take a reef in your short tail and straighten your back. Whatever you do, be sure don't forget, tap the mule gently while the cook is on deck. Oh, those were gay times and no equal have they, whatever the weather we'd run night or day. If I owned the world on the ditch I would run, for no other place has such oceans of fun. She's so fond of biscuits she makes them like rocks, and woe unto you if you fall in the lock. They do for a cannon, with them we kill snakes, you're not long on board until every toothache. Her pies are like leather, you need teeth of steel, whenever you eat them how strangely you feel. Her soups are the limit, so yes, all her chow, we put it away, but I won't tell you.
The Delaware and Raritan Canal has cut through the center of New Jersey for 140 years. Construction of the canal began in late 1830. Digging was started at Trenton and also at Kingston. The canal was to run from Bordentown to New Brunswick, a distance of 44 miles. Besides the main canal, which was to open into the Delaware River at Bordentown, a 21-mile feeder canal was dug from Bull's Island to Trenton, its purpose being to draw water from the Delaware River to feed the flow and depth of the canal. The canal and feeder were dug with pick and shovel. Irish immigrants flocking to America during the potato famine were hired for digging. Their pay was 75 cents a day, paid partially in whiskey. Housing and food were bad, and sanitary facilities non-existent. During the summer of 1832, an epidemic of Asiatic cholera tore through the workers, killing them by the hundreds. Workmen who died in the epidemic are buried in Griggstown, Bull's Island, and 10 Mile Run Cemetery. Some graves were marked with names, or nicknames, or an initial. Some not marked at all. Many, like soldiers killed in battle, were buried where they fell, in unmarked and forgotten graves in the meadows along the canal banks and along the tow path. Here, we follow the canal's present-day course, beginning near the State Capitol building in Trenton, running under the Trenton Thruway for 6,000 feet, coming out at Mulberry Street, running under Whitehead Road, crossing under U.S. Highway 1. At Princeton, the canal runs in this concrete aqueduct over the waters of the Millstone River, then through the canal's Lock 8 in Kingston. During the canal's life, many renowned and unusual vessels sailed its waters in order to avoid the perils of the open sea around Barnegat Bay and Cape May. It was a substantial shortcut. The ocean route between New York and Philadelphia was 276 miles. By canal, only 108. Luxurious yachts traversed the calm canal on their way to and from destinations north and south. In August 1907, a flotilla of some 200 yachts passed through the Delaware and Raritan Canal. It was the New York Yacht Club headed for the Jamestown Exposition. Among the especially dazzling yachts to ply the canal were Pierre Lorilard's strikingly handsome Riva, William K. Vanderbilt's battleship gray yacht, Tarantula, and most dramatic of all, J.P. Morgan's legendary black-painted Corsair One. Here, the canal washes past Lock 13, the deepest lock, with the oldest lock house on the canal, built before 1840. Then past the Johnson & Johnson Company itself, and continues parallel to the Raritan River. Then flows on past the Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge, called the High Bridge, the only one of the canal's 60 bridges built high enough to allow boats to pass under. The canal goes on past the former home of the Janeway's Wallpaper Company. By the way, one of the first wallpaper manufacturers in the United States, attracted to the canal, along with many others, such as the New Brunswick Foundry, by the convenience of shipping. The Albany Street Bridge was surrounded by the prosperity of the canal's outlet. Here were the moorings, loading docks, factories, and markets. It was along here that the Star Linseed Oil, White Lead, and Color Works Company built their factory in 1866. It burnt down in 1870, was rebuilt in 1871, reburnt in 1875, and then their 300 employees became rather discouraged by the fortunes of the paint business. And here now, we see the exit and emptying out of the canal into the salt water of the Raritan River at Lock 14 in New Brunswick. Here also are seen the pilings costing hundreds of thousands of dollars of unfinished Highway 18, which was to cover part of the canal, a project since abandoned. During the construction, when the canal was expected to carry passengers, a special boat was built in Hoboken, a rare and one-of-a-kind boat, a passenger boat, especially designed for the Delaware and Raritan Canal. She was 100 feet long and only 8 feet wide with a prow like a knife edge, a craft designed to draw no more than 15 inches of water. She was called, in Romance of Egypt, the Ibis. Her 100-foot deck was covered with an awning, beneath which sat 60 armchairs, upholstered in plum, no less. Scorning the mules which drew the freight boats, the Ibis was drawn by immaculately curried horses. Instead of the 2-day journey imposed by the speed limit on the freight boats, the Ibis traversed the canal in 9.5 hours. The trouble was that 9.5 hours was still far too long when compared to railroad time. The hope of prosperous passenger traffic was based on the idea that scenic beauty and relaxation would take priority over speed. Hurry was an American trait in 1834, even as today. The railroad took the passengers, and the canal went on hauling coal. This is the Delaware River at Bordentown. Here is Lock 1, as it would have been seen by Joseph Bonaparte, who dwelt in lavish estate on the bluff overlooking this site. Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon, former king of Naples, former king of Spain, lived here in Bordentown for 23 years, from 1816 to 1839. So he saw the digging of the canal and the opening years of the traffic on it. In the foreground, sweeping off to the right, are the tracks of the Camden and Amboy Railroad. In 1901, one of America's most famous train wrecks took place about 3 miles up the tracks. This was the renowned wreck of the Nellie Bly, celebrated in story, poem, and song. By the way, the conductor had the unfortunate name of Sap, S-A-P-P. His name generated the song entitled Sap Forgot to Pull the Strap. One of the engines of the Camden and Amboy, the John Bull, was probably the first engine ever to be outfitted with a cow catcher. Regardless of this pioneering precaution, the Camden and Amboy had numerous smash-ups during its youth. The average canal boat carried approximately 100 tons of coal. The boat was drawn down the canal by a team of mules flopping along the tow path. The mule skinner either walked beside the team or rode the rear mule. He urged the mules along with swearing, singing, and the threatening overhead whistle and crack of his long leather whip, which he wielded with the relish and polish of a virtuoso. Legend has it that a skilled mule driver could whip-flick a fly off a mule's ear without touching the mule. The mule skinner was the canal's troubadour. A major mule stable along the canal was that of Jim Buckaloo, and there was a raucous song customarily rendered by the mule skinner as he drove along, entitled Old Jim Buckaloo, and cast aspersions upon the quality of Buckaloo's mules. Mules and mule drivers were changed 3 times during the 2-day trip between Bordentown and New Brunswick. Traffic was often very heavy on the canal, and the stopover for the driver and mules was not very long, and then they were hitched up and on their way back again. The first tugboat used on the Delaware and Raritan Canal was the Robert F. Stockton. The Stockton blazed the way for the use of steam tugs on the canal. A mule team could only haul 1 canal boat at a time. The tugs could haul a trail of boats, roped in line to one another. The tugboats also themselves carried freight in the hold, on deck, inside the deck house, everywhere. The tugs did not, however, replace the mules to the extent you might imagine. In the first place, mules were cheaper. Secondly, even with rock facing along the banks, the tugboats were deliberately limited to a speed of 4 to 5 miles per hour. The people who lived along the canal would line up an inviting array of cans and bottles on their fences. Skippers, deckhands cruising by would sling chunks of coal, providing many a householder with his winter's supply of fuel. The crew of the canal boat was usually the skipper or captain who piloted the boat with the tiller, and a deckhand in the fore who snubbed the boat through the locks. The canal boat was a floating home for many families. On a typical canal boat, you might see the captain at the tiller, the deckhand in the prow, the captain's wife pinning up her wash on the deck, small children playing, tied to the cabin to keep them from falling overboard, a cat or a dog slouched on the deck with a coop of chickens. All this floating blithely down the canal atop its load of coal.